Hey everybody, Roxabox90 here with a Magic the Gathering Top 8 Cube Card Countdown. Now for those who have been following my channel, you know most of my top 10s are EDH Commander. They are top 10s, not top 8s, but I think I'm going to mix things up a little to do a top 8 cube cards. Why 8, you ask? Because it's too cubed. It's too cubed for those who love double entendres, because I do. Top 8 cube cards, 2 cubed cards. And we're going to go through the top 8 cards. Now, most people will say, well, cube is super subjective. There are cubes that are including power 9 and so on and so forth. I'm going to immediately create a criteria boundary for most of these other cubes and most of the other cards. The criteria boundary is pretty much the design of my cube. My cube is 720 cards. It reaches across the span of Magic, touches upon many archetypes. It's not a power level cube because the number one criteria I had when I made it was that each card going into the cube has to be $50 or less. So you'll notice things like Liliana the Veil. The reason that's in there is because when it went in, it was under $50. Now it's 100, but it's already in the cube. Things like Jace the Mind Sculptor, Power 9, things like Library of Alexandria, which are staples in Power Cube, those don't even get close to the cut. I think my cubes are already in a pretty good spot. It's always being improved, but it's going to be the fundamental basis for this list. I'm also going to narrow certain cards and throw them out because this is top 8 and certain cards would automatically be too good to be on the list or too versatile. There's too many variants of it. So for example, Soul Ring. That card is a pack one, pick one almost universally. It's nearly impossible to get that card in a pack and not pick it. And so that's not even going to be on the list. Swords. Any of the swords. Swords of Fire and Ice, Sword of Light and Shadow, Sword of all the swords, because there's 5 of them and all of them are powerful in cube, some more powerful than others. I'm not going to go just pick which one I think is the best. They're all really powerful, and because I don't want to have to pick one versus any, we're just going to exclude them. Same thing with cards that, I would say creatures, but cards that are 6 or more converted mana cost, because there's just way too many and they're all way too powerful. Things like Consecrated Sphinx and the Grave Titan, Primeval Titan, Grizzlebrand, these kind of cards, if once you put one on the list, it's very hard to cut any of the others because they're so good and they fit into so many strategies. So I'm just going to exclude those from the list as part of the criteria. So some honorable mentions. I don't want to delve too much into honorable mentions, but cards I love. Zealous Conscripts, absolute fantastic card, fits into tons of decks, especially aggressive decks. If your opponent is ramping, you get to steal their big creatures, and because it's a permanent effect, you can steal Planeswalkers. There's so much to do with this card and so aggressive. Rofellos is one of the biggest ramp cards in the format. If you're considering any kind of green plus something ramp strategy, Rofellos is the #1 man for that strategy. Super powerful card. Fact or Fiction, this fits into so many decks. It is one of the best draw spells in cube, but it's also great because it forces your opponent to be put in a very stressful situation while still being interactive. Batterskull, much in the same as Swords, but not quite as much. Batterskull is a fantastic card. It's so hard to deal with in terms of blocking. It's so hard to deal with in terms of attacking. It's just all around awesome creature and artifact. Vidalcan Shackles is very narrow. It's super powerful, but in any blue plus something strategy, Vidalcan Shackles tends to be insane. Just a nice honorable mention. Upheaval. This card is rarely a loss to ever play it. Usually it'll be an equaler across the field or you'll be in a better position to win. And last in the honorable mentions is Jace Memory Adept. This guy is just, in his format where 40 cards is the deck size, being able to mill 10 repeatedly, if they don't have an immediate answer to a Planeswalker, which is often not the case, Jace will absolutely crush the game. Those are the honorable mentions. Let's get into the top 8 cube cards. Starting off with number 8, Sulfuric Vortex. This card is the premier aggressive strategy card. Most people would say, oh, if you take it early on especially, you're going to be forced into mono red, but I've seen it in even non-mono red decks, even red plus something decks. Any kind of very aggressive deck, this card makes a race that very few decks can handle. Even if they're both aggressive decks, since the deck running Sulfuric Vortex is equally aggressive, it makes it incredibly difficult for decks to handle. It's an archetype builder. Multiple deck types can be built around it. It's one of the premier red aggressive cards. I love it. 7, Sneak Attack. This card also builds incredible archetypes. It's one of the few red cards in the cube that is splashable into many other colored decks. So even if you're running 2 completely other colors, most people would consider splashing this in because it fits so many archetypes. Forget just the cheat into play archetypes. Sneak Attack is, as an enchantment, repeatedly used of cheating big creatures into play. Even if the strategy is things like Birthing Pod, Sneak Attack gives you flexibility for cheating into play that very few others do, and it's very hard to remove and deal with. Number 6 is Treachery. This card works so well. While my cube is not a particular Storm cube because it's too big, it's very hard to get enough good Storm cards. Treachery works well with Storm. It is the best steal a creature effect from the field because it untaps. It's mind control that gives you all your land back. It's just all around awesome. It was printed in the Urza block, and we know why. It's absolutely broken across the board. It is often a first pick, even for decks that are not running exclusively blue. Incredible card for control, aggro, any kind of player alike. Number 5, Parallax Wave. This card is this card there's so much to say about, really. It's a 4 mana one-sided wrath, to quote one of my friends. You can do it on your own stuff, you can flicker it, incredible flexibility, both on their field and their opponent's field. It's a clock, an incredibly powerful wrath effect for 4 mana, far more flexible than things like Wrath of God, and I've seen countless decks use it and abuse it out of this world. Absolutely fantastic card that many people probably have never even heard of. Number 4, Clever Impersonator. This is, for me, one of the most powerful cards in and of itself, just because it lets you take a non-land permanent. This is super important because in a format like Cube, where planeswalkers, artifacts are incredibly broken, having flexibility for 4 mana to become anything, just about anything on the field, gives the player who's running it an incredible versatility that almost no other card in Cube can match, even on a losing end of the field, and completely flip around. It can double up on Eldrazi. It can do so much work for 4 mana. Number 3 is Recurring Nightmare. Recurring Nightmare, it's just one of the cards that gets out of hand with very few ways to deal with it. It has certain archetypes that are specifically built for it. Recur and Reanimate is probably the most common, but it works so well in so many strategies. It's incredibly splashable, incredibly abusable, and almost impossible. It's one of the few cards in Cube that's almost impossible to straight up deal with in and of itself. Number 2 is Balance. Balance is a very powerful card in that it represents something that a lot of players, both aggressive and control players particularly, like, in that it gives you something that's incredibly cheap, low cost, and lets you manipulate the entire game with it. It can be a Wrath of God, it can be an Armageddon, it can be a Mind Twist. You can use it as a low mulligan and then completely destroy an overconfident, aggressive player. The entire game plan can be built around it to be able to be played at the right moment and then to use the advantage gained by it. But for this card to be a dead card in a person's hand or deck at almost any point in the game, incredible card, and there's a reason it's banned/broken in so many formats. Cube is no exception. It's absolutely mind-bogglingly good. And number 1, Umezawa's Jitte, is so good. I don't even know how to fully describe its impact. At a mere 2 mana, you play a card that is nearly impossible for someone to deal with if it gets any counters on it. If it has any counters, even if you have no creatures in play, but it has counters on it, they're in trouble. This card is, because it's so cheap, it can be absolutely abused in multiple strategies. It gives you life advantage, it gives you creature advantage, it gives you removal, all on one of the cheapest equipments ever made. You know why this card has been broken in so many formats, and in Cube, it can go into nearly any deck being created and make the deck better. Regardless of archetype, this card is near universal, those all-powerful cards to fear. Many of you have different opinions, and I'd love to hear them. Please let me know yours down below in the comment section. Feel free to look at my Cube list and kind of get a sense of where I'm coming from. If you have cards that are even outside of this list, outside of my Cube, that's fine too. Bring them up. Let me know your thoughts about them down below in the comment section. And if you enjoyed the video, tap the like button if you're new to the channel. Check in and subscribe. As always, Roxabox90 signing out. I'll see you guys next time.